Thank you, Shannon. So I've written an open letter to Pastor John and Janie. Now, I'm sure every person here today could stand up and tell you two how much you've meant to their family in the past 11 years. And we considered that option. But in the end, it would make us all late for lunch, allow the Presbyterians to get ahead of us in our own line. And that's something we wouldn't have had to worry about if Pastor Dan was still there. But the general consensus was that all those emotional stories and personal attention would just make you guys uncomfortable. So that honor has been left for me alone. Now, I may or may not have written a few letters in the past, but I hope to present today something that conveys the love and the respect that you two have earned from everyone in the congregation. I know you two really don't like all this attention, and in some goofy way, that kind of adds to our excitement. But again, you're leaving, so you really can't do anything to me. You're going to be gone. Hey, maybe you could kick me off the board before you go. Okay. Pastor John, when you told the board a year ago that you were planning your retirement, I began to think about all the things our church has been through during your tenure. Initially, I thought about our very first phone conversation. You may not remember this, but Matthew Adkins had talked to you about our church's need for a pastor. He didn't think you were interested in moving, so Matthew gave me some deeply spiritual advice that day. He said, I don't have a clue how you get through that guy. Just keep bugging him. Maybe he'll just finally give in. Although I can't be sure of Matthew's exact words that day, I do remember exactly where I was. Because when my cell phone rang that day, I was pedaling a tandem bicycle with Samantha toward St. Jude Hospital in downtown Memphis, behind a police escort. In fact, hearing the sirens, Matthew said, "Are you being pulled over?" I said, "No, but it's a long story." So, also making it hard to hear that day was Sam's constant complaining that I shouldn't be talking on my phone since I wasn't going to let her talk on her phone. So I made a decision. I told Matthew, I said, listen, I'll call the Bemis guy, and I told Samantha to quit fussing and start pedaling. So from a Memphis hotel room that night, I called you for the first time to start the bugging process. After a few more phone calls, you reluctantly agreed to an introductory meeting. So Libby and I picked up Nathan from Trevecca, and we all met at a Chili's restaurant, once again back in Memphis. I let Nathan and Libby soften you up with some pleasant conversation while I ate my blackened chicken sandwich. Then, when the time was right, I knew I had to try and close this deal. So we had to sell you on the idea of meeting with the board. That's when I uttered those now infamous words, "We are a pretty low-maintenance congregation with not many hospital visits, and we haven't had a funeral in recent memory." A flippant comment that would come back personally and make me regret it on more than one occasion in the future. The board suggested a week-long interview process so you guys could meet with every group in our church, because we were smart enough to know that we're an acquired taste. And we believed in the long run, we could either wear you down or we'd start to grow on you a little bit. I now believe that God needed a full week to convince you two that Flintstone, Georgia was the place to be. Something worked. Soon after your arrival, you encouraged us to finish the Family Life Center. But your obsessive love of coffee challenged me to redesign the plans to include what quickly became the two most popular rooms in the church, a coffee bar and a seating area. Miss Janie's love of big open spaces caused another change in the design. I don't know if you remember this. Oh, yeah. She wanted to take two smaller classrooms and make one big one. Now, Miss Janie wanted this open concept long before Fixer Upper came around. So I had to remove a load-bearing wall for Miss Janie, and I had to add a huge steel beam to carry that large attic storage area, or as Courtney calls it, Hobby Lobby Flintstone. And then some as yet unidentified graffiti artists spray painted Miss Janie's Bemis on that new beam before the ceiling even got installed. Still don't know who that was. In the past 11 years, there's been laughter, growth, excitement, and occasionally a stiff-backed, very awkward Scottish hug. There's also been tremendous healing, nourishment, on a constant diet of loving God and loving others, as our Kids of the King's puppets reminded us a few weeks ago. Unfortunately, the sickness and the loss started within a few days of your arrival, beginning with the Buckner family and striking like a plague at the heart of every member of our church. In hindsight, those heartbreaking losses that would follow and the consistent loving ministry that you guys provided may have been the very reason you two guys were led to Chattanooga Valley Church of the Nazarene. In the beginning of this letter, as I stated in the beginning of the letter, it was difficult to convey to you this morning how much you mean to every family here. And the only way I know how to illustrate that collective idea is with a personal story. Because there's no doubt in my mind that you two were led here for me and my family, if for no other reason. During a brief 42-month period, beginning in 2010, my family alone would lose Samantha, my mom, my father-in-law, my brother, my mother-in-law, my dad, and Libby. I wasn't going to cry. Blew that out the window, didn't I? I'll never forget what you two guys did for Libby and I in sickness and in health. On a side note, you know it's been a bad few months when every card and letter you receive begins with a verse from Job. And at the risk of sounding overly dramatic, I felt an affinity to Psalms 23:4 because it felt like truly I was walking through the valley of the shadow of death. But after 3 years of widowhood and countless sympathetic casseroles, I was at a low point in my life. But Pastor John, your consistent, gentle encouragement gave me a frame of reference which helped me keep my sanity. A debatable point for many, maybe. It was at this low point in my life that I was introduced to Jane Simmons. Now here was a problem. Not Jane, but I had not been on a date in 38 years. So I had way more questions than answers, such as, do people still go to movies? What will people think if they see us out somewhere? Is 3 years long enough before dating? What will my kids think? What will her kids think? Do old people even date? I mean, should an old guy date a much, much younger girl? I got one amen. Pastor John and Janie, your advice to us during our first meeting was indispensable when you said, Barry, Jane is not like Libby, and she never will be. And Jane, Barry is not like LeBron, and he never will be. Then, dispensing even more of your matter-of-fact Yankee wisdom, you gave Jane and I life-changing advice when you said this. This new relationship is going to change. It's going to be a major change and a new reality for you both. Your family and friends are going to have to adjust to this reality. It is not healthy to adjust your relationship to fit their expectations. It was an alien concept that was at odds with typical genteel Southern thinking. Pastor John, you and Janie helped breathe new life into two grieving people with your advice and your encouragement. And it came at a time in our lives when others were questioning our decisions, and we were beginning to question every decision we had made since our spouses had died. So thank you. I wish I had the time and the literary skill to tell the personal story of every family that you two have touched in the past 11 years. Because this personal story is just one small slice from this church and this community, which proves, in my mind at least, that you two were led here for such a time as this. I think I can speak for every person in the building when I say your counsel, wisdom, and love that you two demonstrated to us daily in hospitals, funeral homes, ball fields, and living rooms will never be forgotten. So thank you from me, from my wife, my family, my church, this valley, this county, for the work you two have done for the kingdom in the past 11 years. Signed, Mr. and Mrs. Barry L. Healy. And now, as a turn of events, I have a blessing for you. May the peace of Christ be with you as the Spirit leads you to the next good work that God has prepared.
I don't really have any prepared remarks, but I would say, we've had a lot of first things that have happened. There have been a lot of firsts associated with John and Janie. Certainly for me, he's probably the only pastor in Walker County that can be blindfolded and disassemble an AK-47 and then put it back together again, but and when I see sometimes, in fact, we've had conversations down at Susan's Diner, some of which you don't want to know about, they're too boring, but there's been some folks involved in some horrific shootings and had quite an arsenal, but we look at our pastor, he had more than they did. I mean, he had more ammo, more guns, but so far he's been safe to be around, and we're glad about that. One of my big concerns is, it was only mentioned in the video, and this is serious. What about the chocolate cookies? Man. 11 years ago, Barry mentioned it, I learned the character, or it's not the character, but the heart of John and Janie Bemis. Pat called me and informed me of tragedy in our home. I called him my pastor. Didn't ask him for anything except to be alert that I was going to need him later in the week. He almost beat me home. They've been there for us, and I doubt there's anybody in this congregation, whether they're here today or not, that they haven't been there for when they needed them. And that's noteworthy. And I personally will never forget that. We have an award here today that comes through the auspices of the Nazarene Missionary Society, NMI, as it's known today. And this was prepared at the general headquarters of the Church of the Nazarene. And when I was arranging for that, we had a discussion with the person I was communicating with, and he said, "Oh, Pastors John and Janie, so they are both ordained. Does she preach?" And I said, "Only at home." But anyway, I'd like for them to come up here, if you don't mind. This Distinguished Service Award, Chattanooga Valley Church of the Nazarene takes pleasure in presenting this certificate to Pastors John and Janie Bemis in recognition of 11 years of outstanding godly leadership, spiritual guidance, and consummate pastoral care for our church and the community at large. You will forever be in our hearts.